What's going on, guys? This is John Zakari, and today I want to talk about Bloodborne, the latest release from the twisted geniuses over at From Software. The game has been receiving high scores from game critics across the board, which begs the question, is this the best PS4 exclusive yet? Before I get started, I want to say that yes, this game plays a lot like Dark Souls, but that does not mean that you need to be a Dark Souls fan to love this game, and I am living proof of that. My main issue with Dark Souls stemmed from the way the game started. Like, I get it, you want to avoid hand-holding, but the original Dark Souls took it too far in my opinion. Bloodborne gives you an ample amount of tips at the beginning of the game that aren't imposing, but ensure that you're not just running around like an idiot wondering what to do 5 minutes into the game. But as far as direction in the world goes, there still isn't much to go on, just like in Dark Souls. But you're less likely to run into enemies that you're not equipped to handle. That doesn't mean they won't ruin your day, but you'll feel like you at least have a fighting chance. In combat, while it may look the same to Dark Souls, feels much different. Bloodborne rewards you heavily for being aggressive and taking chances. Fully charged heavy attacks will knock down some of the most imposing enemies, and sometimes even bosses. When you take damage, you'll notice a white line moving down your health bar with some red life remaining. If you stay defensive, your life will come down to that white line. But if you attack immediately after you take damage, you can recover that red life. The main change in the combat in this game from Dark Souls is that shields and other offhand items have largely been replaced by guns. Shields, torches, and the such are still in the game, but you're encouraged to use a firearm and a melee weapon. The guns are great for not just staggering enemies, but also kind of testing them. When I encounter a new enemy type, I like to try to get it to attack me first to see what it does, and the gun allows me to keep it from getting too close. Also, your melee weapon can be transformed to give it a longer range, while at the cost of damage. With all of this, you have a variety of ways to approach different encounters. In Dark Souls, I felt like my strategies revolved more around exploiting the AI, essentially trying to out-cheap the cheap game. Whereas in Bloodborne, I find myself often identifying enemy patterns and switching up my tactics to deal with varying groups of enemies. This makes surviving the encounters feel much more satisfying. Now that's not to say I'm not exploiting the AI in Bloodborne at all, because hey, if I stumble on an advantage, I'm gonna take it. Bloodborne's more forgivable combat might turn off hardcore fans of the Dark Souls series. Strikes that would spell certain doom in Dark Souls are often survivable in Bloodborne, and you'll find way more healing items in this game that can be used more efficiently. In my opinion, making this type of game a bit more accessible is the right decision, as now a wider range of players can get into it and enjoy it. But on the other side of things, I think more casual players will be turned off by the checkpoint system. Just like in Dark Souls, whenever you die or return to your hub area, the Hunter's Dream, all enemies in the game will respawn. You light these lanterns that act as checkpoints throughout the game that you can travel between, but they don't come very frequently. Thus begins one of Dark Souls' most famous tropes. You will have to travel through the same area many, many times. However, this isn't as daunting as it is in Dark Souls. The checkpoints at least feel a little bit more frequent in this game, and I feel like you can find more shortcuts back to the lanterns in Bloodborne. Meaning, while you may not find a new lantern, you may find a shortcut back to your previous lantern, making it easier to get between your last lantern and your current point. The art direction and overall visual design of this game is just stellar. The Victorian Gothic layout of Yharnam with streets littered with coffins and relics of a long time past is the perfect home for the city's new, terrifying inhabitants. I don't say this lightly, the enemy and general character design in this game is one of my favorites ever. Almost every time I encounter a new foe, I'm briefly taken aback by the design. From the hordes of villagers that remind me of the Ganados from Resident Evil 4, to the relentless Lycans that seem to always switch up their attack patterns just as I'm about to get their timing down. But I have to say, the most frightening enemy I've encountered so far has to be those crows. According to the lore of Bloodborne, they're so fat from eating human flesh that they have to crawl around on the ground. Not too intimidating, right? But get up close to them and God, that screech, it's pure nightmare fuel. Chances are that if you've looked into this game, you've already heard that the major negative is the long load times. On their own, they wouldn't be that bad, around 40 to 45 seconds, but when you're dying as often as you might be in this game, those times can really add up. An upcoming patch is supposed to reduce those load times though, so hopefully it's something we won't have to deal with for too long. To me though, the bigger issue with this game is the frame rate dips. When the fights are getting chaotic, the frame rate sometimes drops as a result of everything happening on screen. Since the combat in this game often requires precise timing of dodges and attacks, these frame rate drops can sometimes result in a trip back to the hunter's dream. It's not so often that it puts a major damper on the game, but it should be noted. So is this the best PS4 exclusive yet? I'd say it takes that title quite easily because it hasn't had many standout titles to go up against. I'd say this is the best exclusive so far between the PS4 and the Xbox One. And no, I didn't forget about the Wii U. And even though it's a Dark Souls game at heart, I'd argue it's the best new IP of this generation. Regardless of the type of gamer you are, if you own a PS4, you owe it to yourself to at least check this game out. Well, that's a wrap for this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel now so you can say you were a subscriber before it was cool. As always, I'm John Zakari, and thanks for watching.